Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Game Design Perspective. I'm Santi. I'm a game designer currently working in the video game industry, and I'm here to talk about games. As always, disclaimer, this is my opinion, and my opinion alone does not represent anybody I work for, any previous employer, any current employer, or any future employer. This is just my opinion, as always. Today, we're going to talk about this game, which I think has been done a disservice. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Reels of Ruin is what is called a real-time strategy game. It came out last year, 2023, December, and it came with like very little fanfare and very mediocre reviews. And I think that's a disservice, and I think that's an injustice, and I really think this is a misunderstood game because I don't think it's a really good RTS. But I think it's a fantastic Warhammer game. Let's see why that is. If you see the hobby of Warhammer, we're talking about Age of Sigmar here, but this applies to 40,000, 40K. If you see the hobby of Warhammer, is divided in three things, right? It's divided in the modeling and painting aspect of the game, and it's divided in the lore and narrative, and also the gaming aspect, right? The rules for the game. So based on this is what Warhammer is all about. This is the main branches of Warhammer. So how does this relate? If we look at the video games of Warhammer, they're very rarely, if ever, have represented the hobby of Warhammer. They use the IP to create a video game. There has been very few video games that actually represent the hobby of Warhammer. So if we see the lore, if we start with the lore, we start with the Black Library, right? These are all the books that you see in Warhammer. For Age of Sigmar are like this. These are like some of my favorite. If you want to get into the hobby and want to read a book, I recommend Dominion by Darius Hinks. And then we have also Warhammer TV, actually. There's a lot of TV shows that people do not know about. For example, for Age of Sigmar, we have the Black Talons, and we have several episodes of Hammer and Bolter that are in the Age of Sigmar. People that are into this, they get really hyped because these shows and books usually also cross to the games. Based on this man, Gav Thorpe, he's very important for our discussion today because he is the writer of the campaign of Realms of Ruin. If we want to start talking about Realms of Ruin, representing the Warhammer hobby as a whole, we start with like the lore and what the Black Library and Warhammer TV does. So they brought Gav Thorpe to write the campaign of Realms of Ruin. But who's this guy? Well, this guy has written this and a lot more. He's a very celebrated Warhammer author. He has written some of the most important stories in the lore of Warhammer, and he's adding his touch to the campaign of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, which means that the campaign of Warhammer Age of Sigmar is not just important, it also represents, it might not be, in my opinion, the greatest campaign of all time or the greatest story of all time, but it's a really solid story that really represents what you find in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. The darkness, the desperation, but also the hope you find in the fantasy setting of Warhammer. It's really well represented, and someone that is not in the hobby, it is a really good first introduction to the terms, to the factions, and to what is the lore of Age of Sigmar. It's a fantastic entry point, narrative-wise, which was probably the goal of the campaign. A game that actually represents the Black Library and the lore aspect of Warhammer. Then if we continue, we go to the painting aspect, right? This is the mascot. This is the mascot of my Thursday Warhammer gaming group. You cannot say anything bad about it. Okay, he's perfect the way he is. Jokes aside, Warhammer, the 90% of the time that you're engaged in the hobby of Warhammer is not either in the lore or in the game, but it's actually painting your models. And it's like something that some people can do really quickly and they don't enjoy it as much, and they play with their gray figures and the gray terrain. In my case, I really enjoy it, so I try to put my best. This is actually a setup I did for Age of Sigmar. I painted and assembled all this, and you can see in the background the floor of my apartment at the time. I enjoy that aspect of the hobby, and people that are into the hobby as a whole tend to spend most of their time painting and modeling and customizing their own figures. There's no limits that you can do. You can mix and match. Sometimes units come with extra unit, like with extra pieces. So in that case, you can mix and match. Nobody's stopping you. This is something that actually this game brings to the table. The customization. It brings a customization in your faction, in your characters. It brings customization in the maps. You can create your own maps like the same way you would create with your own terrain, and it brings a customization in the photo mode, because as you guys saw, photography becomes a natural aspect of the hobby because you want to take pictures of your miniatures. So they actually brought this part of the hobby to the game, and I don't know if this has been brought to this level to any video game of Warhammer. Now, if we go to the gaming aspect, Warhammer is not about base building. Warhammer is actually not technically about enormous armies fighting each other. Warhammer is about 4 fundamentals. Warhammer is about your units as a whole. The individual units are rare and they're called heroes. Usually units are more, they work in a group, and you don't micromanage units like in other RTSs. This is your units. Each unit is as a whole, they move together, they act together. The second thing is about armies charging each other into combat. The third one is about abilities, is how my army breaks the rules or modify the rules that are on the basic handbook. So these are the abilities of like your army or other armies. What this picture is representing is something called an endless spell, which is like spells or magic spells in Warhammer that have their own models because they don't disappear. All Warhammer is about your abilities in your units. And the last one is about objectives, holding, taking, retaining, and getting objectives so that you get points. So this is the hobby of Warhammer. As a game, at the base game, like the basics of the game are this. In Age of Sigmar, 40k has shooting, a lot more shooting than Age of Sigmar, but in Age of Sigmar, these are like the 4 fundamentals, right? So if we go and see Realms of Ruin in gameplay, for example, this is a picture of me and my friends playing. You see the circles, there's no base management, your units are together, and you are holding objectives, which is what Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Realms of Ruin is. As an RTS, Realms of Ruin is definitely clunky if you're expecting a real-time strategy a la Starcraft. But if you're expecting a Warhammer game, you're getting an amazing interpretation in real time of the rule set of Warhammer. For example, here, we're holding, your units are selected by unit, not by soldier. Your units are selected by unit, and you're holding an objective. If you see the top of this picture, you can see that there are points, which in Warhammer you play through victory points as well. It's an interpretation of real-time game of the rule set of Warhammer. And even in the units themselves, this is Annihilator, my favorite unit in the Stormcast army, which is the poster child of Age of Sigmar and is poster child of Realms of Ruin. If you can see here, it might be a little bit small, but if we can see here, we have Annihilator per squad. I'm gonna make it bigger for you guys really quick. Annihilator per squad, we have 3, and it has Annihilator's Force of the Falling Star ability. That's what I have selected for you because they interpreted and they were very loyal and very close to what the units actually do in Warhammer, which if we go and bring from the actual rulebook, which by the way, I have here the Stormcast book. So if we take from the book what this unit actually does, we have the same as before. Annihilators per squad, 3. Annihilators, unit size, 3. Ability, Force of a Falling Star. Ability, Force of a Falling Star. And they actually do similar things. What does this all bring? The only thing that this is saying is that Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Realms of Ruin is not an RTS as traditionally we interpret RTS. Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Realms of Ruin is a real-time interpretation of the Warhammer rule set. So if at any point you were ever curious about the Warhammer hobby, the best way to get into it is through this game, because it really brings everything that the hobby of Warhammer brings to you. It brings the lore that is relevant to the current thing that is happening in Age of Sigmar. Actually, it brings a celebrated Warhammer author, it brings the modeling, it brings the terrain aspect, it brings the painting aspect, and it brings the gameplay aspect of Warhammer to you in a compressed package so that you understand and you can feel if this hobby is actually for you. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Realms of Ruin is the best way to enter the hobby, in my opinion. So if you've ever been anything curious, even if it's 40K, this is a great way to get into it. And this is why I think this game has been done a disservice. The way that reviewers have been treating it, the way that the media has been treating it, I think it's not fair. I think it has been completely misunderstood. I'm Santi. This is the Game Design Perspective, and give this game a chance. Have a good one.